You're listening to Community Global Internet Radio and the Aunties from the Golden West podcast. Today, we are down one auntie. Auntie Teresa, also known as Tiny, is a tad under the weather and regrets not being able to be part of this dialogue. But we will march forward anyway, and we are very pleased to have one of Sacramento's, I think, prime resources for public health and advocacy, Mary Margaret Baker. And she's with us today, and we're going to be discussing public health and its many aspects. So let me fill you in just a bit on Mary's background. She has, done so many things, but she's been like a radio commentator on public health. She was the owner of Chicken Soup Plus, a very good business here in Sacramento. And she was at the very genesis of the conservatorship movement, which is now picked up across the United States and elsewhere. Mary, we have joked many times about the fact that you have more letters after your name than in your name. I'm going to ask you about those letters, but I also
I don't know if I can remember them.
I know there's a lot of them, but I'm also going to, at this particular point, officially welcome you back to Sacramento after your 16 years living in Maui. And we have missed you, and I know you're going to be telling us some things about your radio program in Maui as well. So Mary, please tell me how you got interested in public health, and can you give me some aspects of some of the degrees that you hold?
Okay, well, where I got interested in public health was in college when I was doing public health nursing. And it became very obvious to me that when you are in the community and you make a house call, because that was my first interest in love, was home health. You're a guest of the patient. When you're in an office base, which I have been in and saw patients in my office, you're in charge. And I really think that the whole process of the person, the patient, feeling in charge of their health is the most critical factor. And so that's kind of what got me involved since high school. No, well, I did nurse's aid in high school, but chalk that off. But this was in college.
Okay.
In Somerville, Massachusetts, I did home health.
Wow.
And
any members of your family in public health?
Well, my sister, the next sister down, was an attorney. Well, first she was a nurse and a nurse practitioner, and then went to law school.
Wow.
So she was a nurse attorney, and she's since retired. And then my mother was a nurse. And those were the three of us. Out of 5 kids, 2 were involved in nursing. But anyways, so I got my bachelor's at Northeastern, and I moved west to get a master's at UC Davis. I applied for the program, and I said, hold everything. I'm moving out to get residency. And they said, well, we can't guarantee we're going to accept you next year. I said, I'll take my chances. I figured if they accept me 1 year, they're going to accept me the next year.
Yes, you think.
So I just patted myself on the back and took off in my little Vega cross country, and here I am. I got the next year. I got a master's degree at UC Davis, and then I got a second master's degree in nursing at California State University in Sacramento. And then I call a toolbox of credentials that case management, doing cosmetic dermatology, teaching laser treatments to doctors' offices, and protocols and safety kind of things.
Yeah.
But my love, and then of course I had Chicken Soup Plus, which was a home health agency by the name of Chicken Soup Plus, and everybody thought, Chicken Soup Plus? And I said, well, when do you need chicken soup? Oh, when you're sick. Okay, then they got it.
Yeah.
But, so anyways, yeah.
And if you could just say a little bit more about Chicken Soup Plus, and also the whole idea of conservatorships. That was something that you kind of were right there talking about it, pushing them, and there was an article about you in Time Magazine.
Time Magazine, I remember. Well, how that came up is 2 women attorneys who had 2 clients. They were a couple, and each had their own estates. So these 2 attorneys came to me and said, would you be willing to be a conservator? And I said, well, what does that mean? I mean, what do I have to do? Well, you're totally in charge of the person. You become a financial conservator and a physical conservator. I thought, well, that's something I can do. I know that I'll make sure they have good care And, I'm very honest, so I'm not going to rip their estate off or anything like that. And at the time, there was a woman judge. So here we were in chambers with 2 female attorneys, the female judge, and me. So it was all women deciding about this couple who were in their late 80s and had no children, didn't get married till they were in their 50s. Anyways, so that's how I became involved in conservatorship. And it was a very, really rich experience. And I made sure, here was a couple that had been separated. They couldn't remember why they were separated, why they were angry at each other, which can happen when you're at certain ages.
Yes.
And so I remember the husband had a giant hernia, had to have surgery. So I gave them permission to do surgery. He went to a nursing home. I brought his wife over, and they hadn't seen each other in 3 years. And they sat there, held each other's hand, and cried. And I thought, oh my God, just doing this, I feel like I've done the major job of being a conservator,
Sure.
bringing them back together. If you can just imagine that scene, I just broke my heart. Anyway, so, and then Chicken Soup Plus, there was a whole movement of nurses being entrepreneurs. And so without knowing I was part of a movement, I started my business. I started Chicken Soup Plus, the practice, as a home health agency. And then, lo and behold, about a year later, I got a call from Time Magazine out of their San Francisco bureau. And they called, hello, this is Time Magazine. We'd like to do an article on you. I go, oh, right. And I hung up. 'Cause I'm
Perfect.
thinking, right, Time Magazine. They're calling me in Sacramento. I can't believe it. So they called back and said, don't hang up. This is really the case. We're really from Time Magazine. And so they came and they took pictures and they wrote an article because they're the ones that told me that there was a movement. I was part of the movement of nurses being entrepreneurs.
Wow.
And so when you're in the middle of doing something like that, you don't realize that you're in the forefront of a movement. You just
Right.
do your thing. And so lo and behold, then I started getting on NPR radio and all these TV stations like CBS with Dan Rather, and of course.
Was it because the idea of conservatorships hadn't really been explored, or was it something that people were saying, wow, this is something that has legs, this is going to carry people for a long time?
The difference was there had never been a conservator who was not related to the family. So that's what I represented, a person who was a professional clinician who was not who didn't even know either of the people, and because they had no family. They were in their 80s, and so everybody they knew had died, their family, friends. They were pioneers in Sacramento, actually.
Wow.
And what Donald told me, because I had to go meet him, and I wanted to find out if he would allow me to be a conservator, and he told me a story about World War I. He had been in World War I, and he said, people were dying around me. I was wounded. I went to the field hospital, and soldiers all around me were dying. And I started going into chills. And the nurse got in bed, put her arms around me to heat me up with her body heat, and I survived. And he said, I'll never forget this. And he said, sometimes you just have to trust somebody. So I'm going to trust you. That's exactly what he said. And so then there I was. And I was the first person, I think, in Sacramento County that was a non-related party that became a conservator, financial and physical conservator of someone or some people. It was a couple.
Because that word has become part of our vocabulary now,
And then the county has, and they were so adamant, they were both he had been in business. He had over near Curtis Park, there was a big garden center, and he had had that garden center for years.
Wow.
And then property was bought out and houses were built.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Wow. There are a few things that I don't know if you want to just weigh in on these, Mary, but there's a lot of new talk coming out from science about the fact that we're going to be able to live a lot longer than we thought we could. I mean, if you look back, during the time of Christ, the average age was 32. I mean, Christ made it to 32, and he was lucky.
He was an old guy.
Yes, he was. Do you see that because we're improving a little bit, in nutrition, we're not smoking the way we used to. People are
Thanks
being
to
warned.
Diane and Teresa's
Well,
programs.
and people are being warned about not too much alcohol, a little bit, 1 cup of coffee a day. Do you see us being able to really improve that sometime? Science, there have been some new articles just coming out recently. Scientists have said we can easily make it to 150.
You know what? I believe it's so because I just saw something on the internet. There was a nun at 118 today.
Yeah,
I mean, not today,
118.
today, but in this time frame.
Uh-huh. And was she American, or do you know?
I do not recall, but there's that whole blue zone.
Yes.
And how people live in the blue zones because of
exactly.
And personally, I've just transitioned my own diet to plant-based protein, and I have found that it is the absolute best. Within 2.5 weeks, I have 1 kidney, and so I'm a potential candidate for dialysis.
Uh-huh.
And within 2.5 weeks, my blood values that would determine yes, go into dialysis, no, improved to such a degree that my nephrologist was absolutely pleased and said, I've never seen anybody embrace this change and have such impact on their blood chemistries.
Right.
So I think, to me, now sitting here, having, done all the regular things people have done, I think diet is a key. I think diet and choices of healthcare, styles of living are what makes the difference.
Yes, we're all agreeing.
We're all agreeing to that.
Absolutely true.
Because I am proof.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, the nurse at UC Davis, I called. Usually there's an advocate or something at the hospital, and people call and complain. Well, I decided I was just going to call and tell them they need to be doing more about plant-based protein diets.
Right.
Because Maureen, who is the nurse, who gave me, it was a telephone consultation. She's kept in touch. She's the one that clued me into it. And I'm like, oh my God, I told the doctor, Dr. Hamden, I'm going to do whatever I can do to stay off of dialysis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Period. End of story.
Absolutely. Well, even I'm a fan of Kaiser, and my doctor at Kaiser, every time we see her, plant-based. Are you eating plant-based? Plant-based. I'm eating plant-based. You should eat plant-based. And, when you look at, people who are eating plant-based, they look healthier. I was just wondering if you had any take on that, and I'm glad to hear that you think that a plant-based diet is probably one of the best ways you can go.
Oh, it is totally. I'm totally behind it. I tell everybody about it they will listen. It's like my little soapbox, and this just started about in September, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel I've improved my health greatly just since September.
Right. And now that you're back in California, I don't think there was much worry in Maui about gun violence. I think that was probably not on the top of your list of things to worry about. In California, the state of California is starting to look at gun violence. The Department of Public Health is looking at gun violence, and what they're really saying is that this is very much a public health issue. How do you feel about gun violence as a public health issue?
I think gun violence is a very big health issue. And I think there's a side that says, look at all these things happening to people who just walk down the street. Like the guy over at Sutter Lawn, who is a program director at public radio,
right.
Capital Public Radio. And he went to the bank, get money for his poker game at the afternoon weekly poker game, came back, parked his car, and some guy stole his money, got the money 100%, and then killed him with a gun.
Yeah.
And I'm going, what? Why are people doing this? I mean, you see it on next door, stealing. I was a victim of a catalytic converter stolen, and since December 20th, I've been without a car. And then I fought the whole time with USAA to have them repair my car and not total it, because I thought my car was okay. We had another 100,000 miles.
Sure.
So I think that guns have pervaded our culture, and it's been a very major. I mean, usually they're not wounding people; they're killing people.
That's right.
And that's the problem.
Right. So that
even getting what they want.
That fits in the realm of a public health issue. If people are dying from it, it surely is more than a violent
there's that
issue.
physician at UCD that does all the research on gun violence. I forget what his name is.
I know,
He's a
I do too.
family
but
practice guy
yes,
that used to be
yes.
there when I was there.
Yeah,
At
well
UCD.
known. And
Yeah.
it just slips me.
Slips my mind.
Yeah,
But he is quite a guy doing all that research. And but it's gotten worse after COVID when people have been carjacking and people the elderly walking down the street in San Francisco in front of a pharmacy and being bumped off.
yeah. I
No
know.
reason.
Exactly.
No reason.
Exactly. Exactly. One other area, Mary, that I think is kind of interesting that we haven't talked about, and that's exercise. I have seen you exercise, and we have taken yoga together and things of that nature. What do you think? Do you think that somebody should be maintaining, as much as possible, an active lifestyle, and how to do that?
Well, I think it's absolutely, it's the lifestyle. Those are the lifestyle issues that are going to keep you as healthy as possible. And yes, I live in West Sac. There's a West Sac Rec Center. I just love it. My husband and I love it. And there's group classes. You can have, for $30 a half an hour, you can have a coach to go over things with you. I go at least 2 or 3 times a week to do kinesis, which is, a pulley system, or I do what they call fit and flow. So yes, I think exercise, keeping movement. Like when I used to do a lot of reservists physicals, I was working and would go to American Samoa. I went to Guam, Utah, and I was in Hawaii. I'd say to the troops, okay, only floss the teeth you want to keep.
Beautiful.
Okay?
Beautiful.
So they go, oh, okay. I mean, they got,
so they
okay,
got
so
that,
that's kind
yes.
of preventive, right? And so I think the same thing is true with exercise. Walking is the least thing you should do, but the most important. Because as you get older, hips go, knees go, all kinds of things happen that you don't expect. People that are healthy their entire life. Mm-hmm. So I think exercise and movement. I think the key is movement.
Yep. The Japanese are very into ikigai, and like they say, everybody, no matter what your age, you have to have some purpose. You've either got to have a hobby, or you've got to be looking in on people, or just anything to keep up your activity level. And I think that that's something that Americans have to learn, is that we just cannot start sitting around when we hit 70.
Well, watch
that we've
TV.
got to keep it going.
Yeah. If people just sit and watch TV, it's like anesthetizing.
Exactly.
It's just, we don't even have a TV.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, because I read. And so my husband reads. We both read, and, I listen to the radio or whatever.
Sure.
NPR or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But I think, I think the other epidemic that I'd like to just mention, because I think it's so important, it kind of goes along with advocacy, is loneliness.
Yeah.
I think there's so many people that are really, especially since COVID, I think, are so lonely and detached from connection with the other.
Exactly. Isolated.
And they're very isolated, emotionally and physically.
Yeah.
And I think that is a tragedy beyond tragedy. And I've seen stories where people just, know somebody that's by themselves, like with the recent torrential downpours we had.
Yes.
And they just looked connected with people that might need help. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key.
Well, Mary, I think that you've been in public health. I've tried to figure it out, kind of averaging our ages and stuff, and I came over 50 years. And
that we've known each other?
Well, we've known each other for a long time, but
Yeah.
you have been in public health for many years, as have I.
Yes.
And we've run into a lot of young people. Can you give me just an idea of, if you could influence a young person, would it be to go into public health? And if so, what aspect of public health?
Interesting. I guess what I would do, and I have friends who were thinking of medical school, I would advise them to work in a nursing home to start out, because that gives you the opportunity to connect with an older person. And I think that's where we can start chipping away at the loneliness and the isolation. and then they get aware of what's going on, and they think about their grandparents. They can think about the lady next door, the man next door, or things like that. I think bringing consciousness, because I remember distinctly a friend of mine. I've known him since he was 5 years old, and he's now an anesthesiologist at Sutter. And his name will remain anonymous because I don't know if you'd want me to mention it. But I remember when he was thinking about going to medical school, I told him to go work at a nursing home.
Yeah.
And he ended up getting, a specialty that is not like total connection, because you put people to sleep, which of course is necessary for surgeries and such. But I even back then I thought it was really critical, and I think that's a really good place for people to connect.
Thank you for that, and that's great advice. And thank you for being with us today.
Well, Diane, it's been great.
Well,
we started out in KYDS.
Yes, we did.
Way back when.
Many years ago here in Sacramento, California. And Mary has gone on to bigger things because she's had a show for almost 4 years in Maui, a radio show. And the name of that show?
The Nurse Practitioner Show on health, wellness, and managing your dis-ease.
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much, Mary.
Thanks, Diane. It's been great being here.
You've been listening to Community Global Internet Radio and the Aunties from the Golden West podcast. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for listening to Community Global Internet Radio.